Today on Awaken and Ascend, we're going to the other side of grief, loss, and trauma to find healing, new people, and breakthroughs with coach, author, psychotherapist, and trainer Renee McDonald, who is joining us all the way from the other end of the world today, from Australia. Thank you so much, Renee, for joining us on Awaken and Ascend. I can't wait to delve into this because even though I'm fully excited and passionate about this topic, it's also very devastating at times to be going through this. I've gone through grief, loss, and trauma myself on multiple occasions. And so I know what it's like to feel into that and to be with it, and then what's on the other side of it. And, each time could be quite different as well. So I'm really interested in hearing about your perspectives. And before we get into that, I'm curious about what lit your path. What got you going in this direction?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. And thanks for having me.
Mhm.
So initially, and I've written about this in my book, and I can talk about that later, but initially I got into just, I guess, the counseling and psychotherapy industry itself because of personal experience. But there's another broader perspective of there's mental health professionals in my family as well. So that's that. But I also went through a really traumatic breakup with an ex-partner that led me on this path, sought psychotherapy myself, really liked that process, and then thought I can probably do that too. Then went through the process of learning and being trained, and it was quite a cathartic process, kind of, and that went through a lot of catharsis through that. And that changed my life and the trajectory of my life. So I firmly believe in the benefit of catharsis and almost that breakthrough of moving through that portal vortex of as much as it's really horrible and terrible and harsh to go through grief, loss, or trauma. Often on the other side, I've found there are new people waiting for you every time I've gone through it. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And so you also talk about the paradox of compassion. We were mentioning that just before we started this
Yes.
podcast. And how does that come into play?
Um, First, if we look at a Buddhist concept or even spirituality like Christianity, because spirituality can mean so many things to so many different people. But if we talk about, major religions in relation to compassion, almost every single major religion has a discussion around compassion.
Mhm.
And usually it's ideal for a human to have compassion of the other. What we don't talk enough to is how to have self-compassion. I think the Buddhists talk about that more, and some of the New Age mindfulness practitioners and New Age spiritual practitioners as well. They will talk to the benefits of self compassion. And I've found that to be true too, because I don't think I would be alive, and I don't say that lightly, without the focus and kind of benefits of actually delving deep within myself and finding self compassion for what I'm going through.
Yes. And so what does that look like then, Renee, that self-compassion?
Mm, that even if you're hurting, or you may have accidentally hurt someone else, and sometimes, we can lash out on purpose, or we can not even intentionally do something and the outcome is not good on others either, is to have self-compassion, um, to know that when we know better, we do better,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. And so humans are interesting creatures in that generally we're not, I believe we're not as harsh as some of the critics suggest, but instead we have blind spots. And so that's actually one of the paradoxes of compassion, is our blind spot stops us from having compassion for others.
Mm-hmm. And so how
So,
can we reach out to each other more and help each other and be there
yeah,
for each other compassionately?
yeah. And I've been through a massive awakening over the past 12 to 18 months, but particularly 12 months.
Hmm.
And it's really kind of changed me in some ways for the better, in some ways for the worse, and I'll own that too. But it's, I feel like I've been spat out of a vortex. It's like,
Huh.
and that's how I've found some of my breakthrough moments to be in my life, is even in the midst of that grief. It's, I often have, for whatever reason, I've got a lot of spiritual downloads, and I've talked before about how I can channel and all that kind of stuff, so I can talk to that too. But but I guess in relation to your question, it's about, what is it that kind of is both, so the paradox, but at the same time the moving through. So what it is from me is the empathy place is not enough. So in therapy, if you're ever trained in therapy, you're trained in empathy. Any good therapy course trains you in empathy. But then what the major religions, but also a lot of this new age and mindfulness movement are talking about, is taking it to the next step of compassion. So if we can't be there for another, so that's the kind of question you're going to say. If we can't be there for another, first we have to be there for ourselves. Because if we aren't there for ourselves, we haven't put the mask on ourselves, like the airlines suggest. And the interesting thing, and this is a challenge to all your listeners, if we put the masks on like we were asked through COVID, we're actually suffocating ourselves unless it's actually oxygen that we're giving. So whether that's learning how to breathe again, or actually just imagining you're putting your oxygen mask on, it's got nothing to do with the kind of mask you might put on to get rid of bugs or whatever. So in fact, I think we're in this new place where we need to re-envisage, what does it mean for safety? What does safety mean now? What does it mean to breathe well? What does it mean to have different opinions to another person and still be compassionate? Because this is the paradox of compassion. Because the paradox of compassion is still say, like Jesus would, love your neighbor as you love yourself, even if your neighbor, and so this is, I think, what is not said in the Bible or other major texts, even if your neighbor does you wrong. And so we need to take that next step of, even if your neighbor does you wrong, still having compassion for them. That if they knew better, they would do better.
Absolutely. When people are so full of pain and hurt, that's all they really have capacity for. It's hard to get through that without a lot of support and shining some light onto that, right? And understanding when you're in a different place from that, and you're full of love or compassion or empathy, then we can bring that to them. If they're open to receive it or not, it's a different story, but we can bring that love and understanding and empathy and understanding about their capacity and what they're able to do. Like you say, when you know better, you do better. And if pain and hurt and trauma and grief and loss is all you know, then that's what you're whole frame of reference is about, right? To see the world and the way that we communicate with each other and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'm here to explain it in another way.
Mm-hmm.
Even those who've experienced pain, loss, grief, and trauma of any of that. And so this is the challenge even for your listeners to hear this. Like this is, I feel like a deep learning that I've been through.
Mm.
Even if you've been through that, it doesn't make you wrong because you're hurting. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's especially
Yeah.
that. In fact, it's actually about finding it within yourself to have an open hand to the other,
Mm.
even if they've done you wrong. And so that's the paradox, is that you can have self-compassion and still reach out to the other, even if they're your enemy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've had those experiences over the past 12 months, and I've had to touch the fire on those things.
Mm.
And I've survived, come back to, and without going into anything personally, because I think it's important that I don't. I've touched the fire and come back. But the thing is, if you don't know what someone else is going through, you can't comment. The problem is we're too easy to judge. And so that's also the next step too in therapy training, but also in all my compassion and self-compassion based training, is we need to learn how to come from a place of not judging the other.
Mm-hmm.
My whole life, I have been judged. My
Mm.
whole life. And there's huge backstory of that. And I have had to reach out to people even when I'm hurting, and be kind to people even when I'm hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And overcome my own limitations and limiting beliefs around that. But this is why I talk to the blindedness, because some people really can't see how much they hurt you.
Mm.
And still come with an open mind and an open heart, even if you've been through grief, loss, or trauma. So this is where it gets really interesting. A lot of people that I've found on the other side of grief, loss, and trauma have been through it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they have this is the ironic thing, and the paradox is they have more open hearts than those who haven't been through it.
Mm-hmm.
And that they tend to be less judgmental of someone's process, less finger pointing. And we've had so much finger pointing over the last 4 to 5 years of the whole of humanity on all sides of political, war, just the pandemic, everything. There's been so much finger pointing. This is the paradox too, is we won't awaken, because I find it interesting we're talking about this on this podcast too. So we won't awaken if we can't see the other as a potential friend.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. That's very important. And earlier you spoke about the catharsis. So I'd love to hear more about that, because I know for myself, and I've seen for others too, how much we hold in and suppress and repress, and it's almost like a vice. Sometimes I've heard people comment about it in that way, we hold on. And that catharsis can be expressed in many different ways, and what I'm thinking about. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
So I've got a picture of a mermaid here coming out of the water. And it was kind of, as you're asking me that question, I was thinking, how can I explain this best for the people listening in? And it's actually like that. So it's like you're in this really dark place and you're trying to find the light coming out. So, and yet often you might need help to come out, whether that's seeking out therapy, therapists, a coach, mentor, or just a family or friend helping you through it, or multiple different people you might go to as well. I guess catharsis is that which you have expressed rather than repressed after grief, loss, or trauma, or something hard you've been through. So rather than holding it in, it's actually letting it out and allowing yourself to be the messy self that you might be on the back of it all.
Yes.
And then finding beauty after that point. And I liken it to, sometimes I describe it like this, where it's like a shell from the ocean that might be washed by lots of hard waves. And even if the shell's washed away, sometimes it ends up being more beautiful after it's had some wear and tear. And people marvel at someone else's beauty, like the diamond, that it's mined under pressure. Like we often don't realize the importance of going through what we go through in order to mine our own personal diamonds.
Right.
And that actually in the suppression, we don't get expression, healing, and an opening for different things.
So these are the breakthroughs that can happen then on the other side of grief, loss, and trauma. Yes.
Yeah.
And then new people.
Yeah.
Because obviously when there's been loss, there's been grief, there's trauma, there's also a big change in relationships and the way that we relate to each other, in fact. And so the new people you mentioned in your own journey of awakening and going through this, that you met new people.
Yeah. So for every different level I've been through, I don't know if some of your listeners or I kind of haven't listened to too many of your podcast episodes, but listened to a couple. But I guess I wanted to just talk about the Fibonacci principle, which I'm sure you know about. Yeah. And so it's also, I liken it like this because I've done some coaching training in kind of spiral dynamics. And so spiral dynamics, meeting with the Fibonacci principle, meeting with grief, loss, and trauma. If we think about it like that, it's so this is big stuff. That it's like we're kind of being changed, whether it's going through our own volcanic process, and it creates more fertile soil. Volcanoes create more fertile soil, but afterwards. So it's like we have to go through that awakening or that kind of blowing over process in order to find more fertile soil. And sometimes then it's not in the midst of whatever or whoever we're dealing with things with. It might be somewhere else on the other side where the fertile soil is. So it kind of likens into what you were saying around people, the other people. So for me, the other people, whether it's people like yourself or people like I've gone to lots of coaches or found new friends in different business groups or personal groups. Just lots of different things.
Yeah. There's openings, there's new potentials, there's new ways of thinking when we meet those people as well. And I love how you spoke about healing, for example, through the catharsis and being able to express through that, and that it's messy. Because sometimes, we think healing is like more gentle and soothing and just embracing us and being held. And it can be that too. Often looks very messy though, doesn't it? Yeah. Especially like you said, the last 12 months have been much healing and transformation. And transformation, as I see it, is transcending form, like the way that we were before, the way things were before, that life was before. And we go through this whole process of awareness, greater levels of awareness, and then a rite of passage, this initiation process that we go through, and then this rebirth, essentially. This rebirth. So tell us about this rebirth. Like, who was Renee McDonald a year ago to who Renee McDonald is now?
Wow. so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Renee McDonald a year ago was a lot more naive. That's probably the best way to put it. Not to say that I was actually naive, which is interesting to say out loud. So not that, but that I've now seen the ugliness of family, friends, other people that I didn't think they had in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought more of them. And yet they probably thought more of me. So this is where it gets really interesting. That's the paradox, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing I will say is, and I think for your listeners, I think this is super important. How can you give other people more grace? If you're going through a hard time, maybe they are too. They're just not telling you.
Mm-hmm.
What if they're suppressing it? You're expressing it, and they actually have no way or idea of how to express that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So the
So how would you
rebirthing
just the
is
rebirthing? Go ahead. Yeah,
the
continue.
rebirthing. It's almost like that's just one aspect. Then the
Yeah.
rebirthing.
Mm.
Well, yeah, it's like I've gone to hell and back.
Mm.
And yet now I feel like I'm in a completely different space. You know, I've done things like I've moved house. I've gone through massive upheaval in my business, my personal life. It feels like the cobwebs have been cut off.
Hmm.
Mm.
Mm. And so what does life and business look like now? What are you doing? How are you feeling?
Mm. I'm spreading my wings. Mm.
Yes. Beautiful. That's
Mm.
beautiful. Spreading your wings as a coach, a trainer, a workshop leader, a psychotherapist, an author, and
Yeah,
and there's all of these
yeah.
parts of you that get to be expressed now. A new
Mm.
homeowner, yeah, a different
Yeah,
way of
yeah,
being and living in the world.
yeah,
And so I'd love for you to share those different aspects of yourself that you're offering through your business. Because we have, of
yeah.
course, we'll have your full bio in the show notes, just shared a little bit, the titles just briefly, but there's a lot more to what you do. So I'd love for you to
Mm.
share a little bit about that, how people can
Mm.
connect with you. I know you had a
Yeah,
special offering for everyone that's been tuning in
yep.
as well. So yeah, let us know what it is that you do now.
Yeah, so a few things that people need to know. So I've been about 22 years a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I also do therapeutic coaching. And you know, even prior to the pandemic, I got downloaded, go figure, but that I would need to combine therapy and coaching in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did a coaching degree just prior to the pandemic. And even though I was working as a coach before that, I'm now ICF accredited and all that kind of stuff as well. So I'm like professionally accredited for therapy too. But I now combine both of those skills, I believe, for maximum results for people.
Mm-hmm.
So, whatever the last kind of 4 to 5 years has brought for people, I can hold that space, whatever they need.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I've done training in life, business, and executive coaching, and I've run a successful therapy practice business, so I can talk business, I can talk personal, I can talk executive because I'm now a director of my company, so I can talk to all of these different things.
Yeah.
So there's all of that, but I can also talk spirituality because I've trained in transpersonal work. So there's all of that. I guess I've been never the kind of person to settle,
Mm.
that just be the therapist in the corner office and just do that. That's
Right.
not me.
Yeah.
If you want the therapist with more, you're going to get it from me. But
Yeah.
if you also want more from life, you want to go to a therapist or a coach who can take you there too, who's been to the far and back
Yeah.
and lived to tell the tale too. Yeah. So you want that, but that's why these stories matter. And that's why I like to share, is because I'm here in service of humanity, actually. So I think that's really important that I impart that I'm here in service.
Right.
That this is my very, very strong feeling and expression of myself, in terms of I'm here to lead from the back to help you lead from the front too. Like, so that's what's next. I mean, for the last 3 years, I've been building an app just because I've got lots of spare time, you know. um, so, and that's, I feel like maybe I had to go through the catharsis of the last 12 months to come out the other side, to be able to have these conversations with someone like you, so that people could understand I'm here because I'm here to serve you. And I'm here to hold that space, whether it's messy or not, to hold that space so that people can feel safe to know whatever secret or anything that they've got, I can hold that. And I think in the days of where everything's public and online, I don't ever share about my clients online on purpose. I don't share about, and it's why I have to tell my personal stories, because it's not personal. It's so you guys can connect to me, but so that, you know, we can connect to each other here too. That the paradox of compassion is connection, even when there's disconnection. Yeah. And so that's kind of, I feel like that's one of my lessons that I've learned and what I'm bringing forward.
I'm so glad you're bringing forward, and thank you for your service to humanity. How would people connect with you so that they don't feel so disconnected?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You know, so ReneeMcDonald.com. So just
Easy. Yeah.
ReneeMcDonald.com. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And they'll find everything there. And I know there was a special offering too that you had for the
Yep.
audience. If you wanted to share a little bit about that, we'll have the links, of course, for all of this down below in the show notes.
Yep. So
Yeah.
on my website, you can do a free discovery call. I'm always happy to do that. And on my other website, aott.com.au, if people are therapists or coaches themselves listening in, I provide a lot of freebies on aott.com.au, particularly around starting your online business, or even just having some tweaks to your practice. I've got a lot of different freebies on that website.
Well, fantastic. That's very generous of you. Thank you so much, Renee. And be sure to check that out below, everyone. There's also access to a creative transformation masterclass there, and my information as well, if you would like to connect. Always love that. Love to know what you thought of this episode, what came up for you as you were listening. You can put that in the comments and share it with someone who might be going through and needing some self-compassion and going through that grief, loss, and trauma, and just the healing journey. You know, as Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home. And I know that if you're listening, that you've been through it and know someone who's been through it too. And we're so grateful that you've been joining us today. And Renee, I'm so grateful that you're here joining us. And I wonder if there is anything else that you'd like to share.
No, thank you for having me. Yeah, and thank you for anyone listening.
Well, thank you so much. So appreciate you, Renee, and each and every one of you that have been listening and watching on Awaken and Ascend here every week, Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific. We'll see you again next time. Bye for now.